Welcome to Media Makers Spotlight from Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight, and inspiration.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Candice Bloch, and today I'm here with Charlie Hewitt, a lifelong recording artist and performing musician, music producer and engineer, and a sought-after voice talent with national and international exposure. Charlie is also the founder and president of Mirror Studios, which first opened as a music recording studio, but has since transitioned into a multimedia production and post-production facility specializing in audio post. Mirror Studios works with a range of clients, from independent filmmakers and documentarians to major film studios such as Disney, Universal, and Sony Pictures. Today, we're here to dive more into the world of sound design, audio mixing for film and television, immersive audio, and more. Welcome to the show, Charlie.
Thanks, Candice.
So, pardon the pun, but it sounds like you've had a real passion for all things audio for your whole career, starting as a musician and everything. Can you give us some background on what drew you to music and then eventually producing and engineering leading to the birth of Mirror Studios?
You bet. So I started as a singer and a songwriter and a guitarist. And early in my career, when I'd be performing, if I went to buy a piece of equipment, I went to buy a piece of equipment that I could also use in a recording environment, which was, bedrooms, garage, whatever. And that just slowly expanded. And it wasn't long after that I had folks start knocking on the door and say, "Hey, I understand you can record. So can you record us?" And so it just kind of morphed from that to having a real passion for capturing one's essence, So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the technical stuff just came by necessity, it sounds
like.
Yeah,
I kind of lived through the transition from analog to digital, and then into a tape. We started out in tape, and then went to digital tape, and then into formats that were non-destructive like we have now. So it's been an interesting transition, but it's every day is a new day, right? Every day is a new challenge. Yeah.
New adventures. Yeah, we don't even know what's going to happen next. So we at this podcast, obviously, we focus on screen-based media production, but nearly all visual media is accompanied by audio to tell the story. Not everything, but almost all of it. And anyone, as we know, who's seen a range of quality levels and types of media, that if the audio is terrible, it immediately pulls you right out of the story. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of high quality audio?
Boy, that's a pretty broad question. High quality audio, I guess, is in the eye of the beholder, right? But good audio, good clean audio is the cornerstone of a good production. Sound can pull a less than stellar picture through. Good sound. Bad sound can pull a really good picture down. So you can have a stunning image on the screen, and if the audio is crap, it's the audience knows it. George Lucas always said that audio was at least, if not more than 50% of the experience. And so whenever I talk to students and whatnot with regards to film, I get asked to speak at some of the film schools. And one of the first questions I'll ask is if they can tell me what this medium is. And so many times young film students will say that it's a visual medium. And I disagree. I think it's a sensory medium. I think if it doesn't get the hair up on or you feel goosebumps and whatnot when you're watching something or a good love story and you cry, then somebody missed the point. So yeah, I think it's a good overall project when it's done should be engaging, and that means both visually and orally.
That's a great way to put it, a sensory medium. And as we all know, they always say, I know if I'm watching something particularly scary or something, you could just turn the sound off and it's an immediately different experience. Or, the classic with Jaws, it's all in the power of your imagination, but if you just get that music or something going to evoke something, it's tapping
if you're in the
into.
other room and you hear dawn up,
Yeah,
it's
you
gonna
know what's
happen.
happening. Exactly. So yeah, I'm tying the music to the visuals. How often do you work alongside like directors and things like that when you're working on a project to make sure that the audio is complementing the visual elements of a project?
Frequently. Yeah. I when we get a project in for film, for example, if we're hired to do the sound package for a picture, we will dive in and we'll go through and literally familiarize ourselves with the show. And then we'll do a spotting session. And that is just roll the movie from top to bottom. And when the director or producers we'll stop at a particular scene. How do you feel about this? What are you thinking here? And so many times it's obvious what needs to happen here. And then sometimes there's, in particular, like we've got a project we're working on right now that's 85% sound design. The main character is put in a silencing mask, so there's no dialogue. So everything else is sound design. Or in the brave new world of immersive audio that we're doing where there is no picture, right? And so, but yeah, to answer your question, we work alongside them pretty closely, and then we'll do our job, and then we'll circle back and get closer and closer and closer and fine tune as you go.
Yeah. So, I mean, for our listeners who don't know all of the particulars of the audio space and audio world and audio post, can you break down some of those roles? And more importantly, I guess the difference between like audio mixing versus audio mastering. I know people hear these terms, but they probably don't know exactly what they actually are.
Sure. So that's a good question. The difference between mixing and mastering, and I'll use music as an example. When we would make a CD, for example, doesn't happen too much anymore, but when somebody releases a project and they put out 13 songs or something like that under the heading of a CD title, mixing happens when you're mixing song one and you've got drums and orchestra and vocals and background vocals and bass and guitars and keyboards and whatnot. And you're mixing all of those together, whether it's in Dolby Atmos or whether it's a stereo mix, whatever that is, you're mixing it all together so that song sounds outstanding. That's, you go, wow, that's the essence of the song. Then you do that all over again for song 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in most cases, not always, but in most cases, those songs were recorded kind of usually in one setting. It can be over the course of 3 or 4 days, but it's like all the musicians come together, everybody gets together and they record those 8 or 10 or 12 songs. So there's a common denominator there for the sound of the drums and the sound of the bass. And obviously you can tweak it a little bit, but for the most part, it's also the same room that it was all recorded in. So there's a little bit of a common denominator that orally runs through the whole project. You mix song 1, you mix song 2, you mix song 3. When they're all done, I've got 12 individual mixes. Then it goes to mastering. And mastering's job is to put that final sheen on it, but then also adjust levels and whatnot so that now you're not mixing guitars, bass, drums on this one. You're mixing, the mastering engineer's job is to smooth it out. So song 1 is not any louder than song 5. Song 7, so you can bounce around and there's a common thread through all of it. And there's that final little icing on the cake. It's the last little dash of salt that you put into the stew that's what mastering is. And as you're listening now more on a macro level as opposed to a micro level.
Okay.
Does it make sense?
So sounds like sort of like the final continuity of a whole project versus individual elements.
Yeah. Kind of. So I'll just use another analogy, and I don't know that it's a good one, but if you resurface a piece of furniture, right, and you sand it all down and you get down into the crevices and you make it all beautiful and everything's nice and smooth, and then you put the stain on it and everything's great and you go, wow, it looks great. Mastering would be putting the last sheen of coating on it so that it becomes a piece of it becomes an heirloom piece of furniture. So
Yeah, that final
final
level.
yeah, it's the final cherry on top. Yeah.
It's that final polish, as you said, but how do you make sure that when you're engineering these things, you make sure that the songs, or for example, or like the whole length of a story project, whatever, sounds consistent? How do you consider all of the different listening and watching devices and equipment that people have? I mean, people now are watching films on their phone, or, they might be listening on earbuds to a song or a podcast or anything, or they might have a fully immersive surround sound home theater.
Sure.
So how do you account for all those different environments when you're like mastering all the music?
Well, I listened to them on all of those different environments. There was a time in the studios when we had the big speakers, and then we would have a small little set of speakers, a B set, if you will, right on the meter bridge. And so you'd go from the big speakers and everything sounds big and robust. And then you would literally just toggle over, and how does it translate to the small speakers? And now there's there's such a variety of listening environments. We will take a project, and we've got a couple different rooms. And so we'll mix something. And before we send it off and actually do final mixes, we'll bring up that project in one of the other rooms. It's a little bit smaller or a little bit larger. And then we'll do a rough mix of it and mix it down, and then take it in to listen to it on your phone. Listen to it in your earbuds. I'll go for a walk in the afternoon. I'll throw in a set of earbuds and listen to it, and see whether or not everything translates, so that the little nuances come through. And if something stands out in a different environment, and you bring it back just a touch and smooth it in and fold it into the dough, right?
Right.
It will translate. It will sometimes, if you hear something stand out in one environment, you go back to the source. It was standing out there as well, but because of other things that were bigger and louder and more robust, that you didn't notice them as much. But you pull it back, you don't miss it in the larger environment, but it smooths things out. So to answer your question in a nutshell, right here, these two things right here. Just be here now. Pay attention to your mix. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those of not watching this, he pointed to his ears. Obviously, it's nice to listen to it on all those things. I'm sure, does it get frustrating if there's something that you have to kind of adjust to make sure it still works on maybe a lesser quality listening experience? Does that get frustrating at all, or is it just kind of like a fun challenge?
That's
to make
part of
sure
the challenge. Yeah, that's part of the fun. Yeah, we certainly understand. We are very, very fortunate. We have a beautiful facility and state of the art stuff. I mean, it's like great speakers and tuned rooms, and Dolby came in and tuned our rooms, so we've got a great listening environment, so that when we place something in the room, or we sculpt someone's dialogue, that's what you're going to hear when you hear it back. We're just really, really grateful that we were able to work in that environment. But we also have a very, very keen awareness of the fact that not everybody is going to listen to it that way. So it's vital that we listen to it in different formats and different environments. You have to listen to it in your car, in your computer, on your headphones, on your mobile device. So, yeah.
For everyone listening here, do you have any recommendations for the best possible way, like, a type of headphone or experience, or, just that sort of like, if you're like, and if you really want to enjoy the audio of a certain project, try to experience it in this environment or type of speaker?
I would probably ask someone to reach out, which you can find us, and you can send an email. You can find us online and at mirrorstudios.com. But I get asked that a lot. I was just at where you and I met, and I had a number of people ask if I had a preference in headphones. And actually, the headphones that we use here are the Sony 7506. They're $100, right? They're the standard. They're in all the voiceover booths and all of the control rooms. So we'll be listening to something on the speakers, and then we'll throw the headphones on and see if it translates and move and go back and forth. So, yeah, when I travel, I'll have a Pro Tools rig on my laptop when I travel, and sometimes our engineers will send something my way for thoughts or ideas or whatever. And I have a pair of sound canceling headphones that I travel with, and I'll throw those on and listen that way. So I don't have any one in particular that just go, aha, I found the one.
Yeah, no, not a particular one, but yeah, like so over ear tends to be better.
Yeah, and
you're enclosing your
the 7506 actually is on ear. It's not even over ear.
Okay.
But when I travel, those are over ear. So I think that the biggest thing is much like any part of this industry that we're in, and that is that it needs to be comfortable. So if you're wearing a set of headphones that are clean, but you forget you have them on, those are the best ones.
Yeah.
Because then you get to concentrate on the project as opposed to the equipment.
Exactly. Yeah, no, that's just great overall advice for whatever environment you want to be in or you can be in while watching or listening or any of that. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure people ask you all this advice because that comes with the territory of being really, really a profession or in that profession. You know, I get asked things for other work that I do all the time too. So it's like, you know, you just have to take it. It's a compliment, you know, it's a compliment when they want your expert opinion on something.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that. And so to answer your question, I don't have a particular favorite or something that has stood out. If it's clean and the environment that I'm in is allows for critical listening, then the magic happens, you know, between your ears, and because that's how we interpret it, that's where the magic happens, and how to translate that to the particular project and the software we're working with.
So let's dive into immersive audio. Can you explain what sets immersive audio apart from just like standard audio?
Sure. So audio is audio, right? It's just what we happen to listen to. But when you're walking down the sidewalk, you're listening in an immersive experience. You hear the airplane go overhead when the wind is happening. If the wind is coming through the trees, it's everywhere. It's not just at eye level. So it's not just in front of you, it's everywhere. And so someone talking to you in front of you, that dialogue is right in front of you, but the dog barking may be behind you and the airplane is going over your head and the wind is everywhere, right? So that is immersive audio. Technology is fascinating, and that it is the algorithms that have been created now to interpret that. And we're using our two ears to hear that as we're walking down the street. So these folks, engineers that are a whole hell of a lot smarter than me, have figured out how to interpret that into headphones. So when we mix in immersive, we literally mix in an environment where I'm working in Dolby Atmos, and that is object-based mixing. So the bed, the stuff that happens at eye level, they call that a bed. And back in the day, there was stereo, right? It went from mono to stereo. That like revolutionized the audio world when it expanded that big. And then it moved to 5.1. So there's 3 across the front and 2 behind you, and then the sub. And then 7.1 and 9.1, et cetera. And then recently, they added the speakers above us, which are the height speakers. And when we go to object base, it becomes far more specific, but beautiful on the back end, which is the stuff, the magic that happens under the hood, is that when you place an object like right behind your head and somebody whispers like, I'm right behind you, and you can literally hear it in your headphones right behind you. When that gets rendered out, that translates down the road, that translates to being a deliverable so that when somebody else puts the headphones on, they can hear that very same thing right behind their head. And so it cracks open a whole brave new world of mixing. It's exciting. It's, you know, I listened to one that I did a year ago and go, holy crap, I wish I could do that one again, because we get better at it every day. So
yeah, that's so cool. So how many points then do you have to work with now, or you know, sort of
everywhere? It's 360 degrees.
Okay, so it's not just like
that's the beauty of object based, right? So you can have 12, 15, 25 speakers in your room, but you can toggle back to binaural and throw on the headphones and put on your headphones and mix in the headphones and experience the same placement in the room, only now it's just coming through on your headphones. So there's not a speaker there. There's a point in space, if you will. Yeah.
That's pretty magical that they found a way to make that translate.
Oh, it's nuts.
You can have something in
it's
like
fabulous.
a little like 30 degrees to the right and 15 degrees up, but while you're just in your earbuds. And
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
amazing.
That's what makes it magical. That's what immersive is. Yeah.
So that puts you in the environment even more, which is fantastic. But you don't want to like bombard everyone with too many sounds. So what are there guidelines, if any, or is it just sort of artistry or whatever for balancing how many kind of audio tracks or imports or sources or whatever are more dominant in a particular moment versus things that are more in the background?
Anybody that's known me will know that I preach subtlety. And not every mixer is that way. There are some that, the big crash, bang, boom, the fight scene and the thump and the chainsaw and the race of the engine of the cars when they're racing and whatnot. Those are the obvious big things, right? So in immersive audio, if you're standing in the middle of a racetrack and it's an oval, you can hear the car going around you, right? So that would be one way to do it. But I always like to put myself in the listeners, the audience's seat. And if something is, there are so many buttons and knobs now and so many opportunities to move things around the room that when you go to an extreme, it becomes noticed. And the minute somebody notices your mix, you just pull them out of the story. So my job, if I've done my job right, nobody notices. They just walk away going, holy cow, that was a great story.
Right. They don't notice it. They feel it. They experience
that's exactly
it.
right. That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's all about the subtleties. And so we'll break open a project and one engineer will work on dialogue. And depending on the size of the project, 1, 2, 3, 4 engineers will work on sound design. We'll have one do special effects. We'll have another do backgrounds. And then if the project warrants it, it'll go off to Foley. And when all of those pieces come back together for us, invariably sound design and backgrounds and Foleys will be a little extra loud, which it should be because that was the environment they were concentrating on, right?
Right.
Well, I want to make sure the sound effect works, so I bring the volume up. And when it comes to us, the final mixer, if I'm the re-recording mixer on the project, my job now is to tuck those in so you really don't notice it. It's just when you're walking down the street, you're walking down the street with that individual. And then in immersive audio, when there's no picture, it even goes a little further, which is that's where you want to bump it up just a touch, maybe. So the background now you sense that you're walking down the street. So the wind will be a little more noticeable because our job as a re-recording engineer or sound effects editors for picture, our job is to support what's on the screen. When it's immersive, there is no screen. So now we have to support your imagination. So it's kind of a fine line. And the beauty is there's no rules. There's just guidelines,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So is immersive, can you do immersive with visuals or is that?
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not, they're not separate because,
No. Yeah. Immersive is falling into so Dolby Atmos and that surround environment. When they talk about immersive more now, they're talking like on Spotify and podcasts. And I guess Audible is now released that they're going to be doing the Harry Potter books in immersive. So, right. So we just finished a book that we did in full immersive. We released a podcast a little while back, 4 episodes of a podcast that was full immersive. It was a full-blown motion picture with all the sound design and music and composition and whatnot. The only thing that was missing was the picture. So people talk about immersive that way, but you're absolutely correct. And that is immersive. It's everywhere. So whether or not you're supporting, whether it's on in the cinema or it's on a TV show or it's a podcast.
Right. It's just, putting you inside that environment a little bit more with even more like sort of environment building, world building kind of with, I was just thinking, it sounds like you don't want to necessarily notice everything, but you would notice if it wasn't there.
Oh, absolutely.
That's because with people, it's like if it will know if it's something sounds realistic or not, or
That's
true
exactly
to
right.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a picture that we worked on, and the young gal, and the music was going, and the music was pretty big at that particular point. And it's a transition from one scene to another. So as the music is tailing off, and she comes back into the house, and she's walking in her socks across the kitchen floor, which is a hard floor. And then she reaches up and flips off the light. And when she's walking, you can't really hear her footsteps. But if they're not there, something's missing. Even though because of the music and whatnot, you can't really hear it. And so I've gone through and literally toggled that on and off. There's the footsteps, the Foley of her footsteps walking through the kitchen. But if you mute that channel, there's something, a little bit of substance. There's a little bit something missing from the scene. Even though when you turn that one back on and mute the music, you can hear footsteps clear as a bell. And
it's so like the uncanny valley for your ears.
That's exactly right. So that when you put the two of them together, now you've got, now you've got the whole picture.
Yeah. Something would seem a little off. You're like, is she floating? I don't know. That's weird. Something's a little off there.
Yeah. Even though you can't really hear it, you can sense it when she's there, because there really is a little of her footsteps.
Subtlety.
The subtlety.
Subtlety is key.
That's exactly right.
That's awesome. I personally, for many years, considered being a Foley artist, so I love that stuff. But have you had experiences with creating some fun sound design for things that don't exist in reality, like not footsteps, but something more like the Thopters in Dune or something, where you're kind of creating a new thing that doesn't have a comparison in reality? Has that been something you've had experience with?
I just mentioned that we did a show, a 4-part thing on a podcast. It's on Spotify. It's called The Metal Detective.
We actually have a podcast episode in this show about that as well, because I spoke with James.
Oh, not excellent. Yeah. James was the producer of that project. And James contacted me and said, we've got a project. And and he kind of laid it out. And then he dropped the bomb and said, but the only thing that's missing is the visual. There's no picture. So, and that was the first time we dove in that format. So sound design, which like I mentioned earlier, our job is to support what's on the screen. And sound design for a picture can take anywhere from 4 or 5 days to a couple weeks, right? Depending on the complexity of a show. And that's working pretty diligently on it. Some take longer than that. Metal Detective took 4 months.
Wow.
And the reason it took 4 months is we were experimenting with a lot of things. But in addition, this was a futuristic film noir thriller, right?
Right.
So when a gun fires in a movie, if you look up and you see the person raise their hand with a gun in their hand, you know the bang is coming. Without a picture, I don't know that the bang is coming. So how do we give you that little moment of anticipation ahead of it, that something's coming? So the sound designers, Nico was the sound designer on that particular show, and he did a fabulous job. And he said, okay, we can't venture too far from reality. So the gun's going to go off, it's going to go bang. But a futuristic gun may have an electronic component to it. So he introduced this little bit of a whine, this. So that's just one example, but it was really, really effective, because it was like, don't, you know what's coming, right? So, yeah.
That's fun. Have there been any like standout or memorable or interesting moments where you're recreating realistic sounds in a unique way?
Well, sometimes, I mean, obviously you can go back and Foley something that's just a standout that you don't have. But I'll give you an example. This is where you kind of use your imagination, right? So we did a film, and there was a character, if you will, all throughout the film. And it was this guy's conscience. And the conscience was in the form of a plastic figurine bobblehead that sat on the dashboard of his car. So this guy was just kind of like, he was broken and he couldn't get out of his own way. And every time he'd do something goofy, he'd look at this bobblehead, and this bobblehead was just bouncing around looking at him. He's like, just shut up, right?
Yeah.
So he's talking to this inanimate object. And towards the end of the movie, he does something, as you would expect, just crazy. And he looks at this bobblehead, and this bobblehead's just kind of looking at him. And he reaches up and he grabs it and he throws it out the window of his car. And in the cut that we got, I'm listening for it and I went, okay, that never landed. There was no sound of it landing outside on the pavement.
Yeah.
So I went, fine, we just put a note in there. Well, we're going to have this land. I asked the question and it turned out they only had one. So they had a pad outside the window of the car. So when he threw it out, it landed in the pad instead of breaking it because they had only one for the movie. So when it got to that spot, I happened to be cutting sound for that particular one. And we've got a sound effects library here that's about 4.5 million sound effects. And it's all cataloged. And I'm here to tell you that there is no entry in 4.5 million sound effects that plastic bobblehead hitting pavement, right? It's like figurine.
There might be now, though, it sounds like.
Right, figurine, whatever. There is no such sound effect.
Yeah.
So I started racking my brains. What would sound like that? Anything that would sound like that. But it's not just a hit. There's a skitter effect, right? It's like, like if you were to toss something on the pavement, like a Frisbee or something like that. So I thought about it and we tried numerous things and we came to, it was like, aha, a newspaper. If you throw a newspaper hits, skitters across the pavement as it, goes up to your next door neighbor's house.
Yeah.
So I went in and sure enough, that sound effect was there. So I grabbed that sound effect and put it in. And then of course there's a low end frequency to the size of a newspaper as opposed to this tiny little plastic, the sound that would make. So then you go in and you're creative and we compressed it a little bit and then rolled all the low end out of it. And now it's just the high frequencies. You would never know that was not a plastic figurine hitting the pavement. So, and it was all right there in front of you. Just, it took, 5 minutes of EQ and compression and pushing it into place and voila, move on.
Yeah, that sounds so fun. I mean, that's what I think is so fun. That's partly why I wanted to do Foley when I was younger, is the creativity that comes with it.
Sure.
That, you might not be able to always recreate with the same things. You're like, ooh, what else could do this? And those kinds of stories I think are the most interesting. And people don't think about it. They don't realize that this is what goes into it. And so I love kind of shining a light on the fact that, they didn't have that person's footsteps or that little spoon that fell behind the counter. They did that after, and it's not even a spoon. I think that's so interesting. Can you talk about what IAX is, or the immersive audio experience, and what is the IAX certification? So
IAX is, let's harken back to the beginning of our conversation, is the difference between mixing and mastering. Mm-hmm. So when this brave new world of immersive that's now being reduced to binaural so you can listen to it in your headphones, we did the metal detective and we mixed it in full Dolby Atmos. And then we did a binaural mix of it, which is a render process with inside of, and you can get it in Pro Tools. And I think Blackmagic has it. And there's several different formats where you can do this mix down. And we listened to the excerpt that we would do. And when we started listening to it, we went, this doesn't translate as well as I'd hoped. Like we were talking about before, right? When I listened to it in earbuds, it's pretty good. When I listened to it on a computer, not so much. When I listened to it in the car, horrible. And so we went back to the drawing board. And it occurred to me in a conversation, I went, hang on a second here. I grew up in the music business and we would never release an album or a CD, or I'm dating myself with the album there, but we would never release a project without it going to mastering first. And so from my perspective, that's what was missing in this final transfer that went out to Spotify. Was it didn't go through mastering first, the binaural part, not the Dolby Atmos part. That's fabulous because that gets translated to the theater or to Netflix or whatever. But when we do the fold down into binaural and we played it back, there was something that wasn't translating. And I'll bet we did about 100 different mixes here at the studio. And we came up with some multi-channel compression and EQ and whatnot, that final sauce that we were talking about, that sheen, that polish, and generated it out. And it was like, finally was, wow, that's holds up in all of these different formats. And so when we started asking around, there didn't appear to be anybody else doing this. So we went back and said, immersive audio experience. So that's what IAX is. And so the certification is currently coming through Mirror Studios. That's where the IAX certification comes through. It's like, we have clients that send us their project and we go through and put that final machine on it, right? That final polish, much like after you finished your music project, you'd send it to a mastering engineer and they would use their ears and their fine tune and tools and whatnot to put their final sheen on your project.
Excellent. So that's making sure it will sound just as awesome no matter where it's being
That's right.
enjoyed.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that it gives you a leg up so that your audience, whatever format they happen to be listening to it, gets as much oomph as they can.
Nice.
Yeah.
When you put all that work into creating something, you
don't want
it
it to fall apart when somebody's
possible.
walking and slap. Exactly right.
Exactly. Then they might not have even known some cool little thing was considered. So that's really great that you all offer that. So and hopefully more and more people take that into consideration as well, or go to you for that. What do you think creators should consider when they're filming or recording their audio to make sure that they're going to have good audio and a nice, fully immersive experience? And I'm talking like live on set, for example, versus additional stuff like ADR and Foley and things like that.
Well, all of those things come into play, but hands down, the most effective and cost-effective thing that you can do is good production audio. Get the best production audio you can. And as a filmmaker, the director or the producers need to don't skimp on getting a good sound person. And then you need to empower that sound person to say, cut, because so many times the sound person is just kind of back there listening and they go, yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. And a director that I worked with on a project, when they would call cut, he would turn to the DP and say, did we get it? And then he would turn to the on-set audio recordist and say, did we get it? And if either one of them said, nah, they go, do it again.
Yeah. Because
that is the single biggest challenge we have, certainly with independent filmmakers and documentarians when it comes through. And that is that it was poorly recorded. And then they come to us and say, can you fix that?
Yeah.
Right?
You work some magic, but you can't do all.
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. And so there's a lot of things we can fix, that some of the technology, there's a lot of things we can fix, but it's time consuming. So now, instead of taking 3 days to prep and mix, or, maybe 3-4 days to go through and dial it in and tweak it and everything's great, it ends up taking 7 or 8 or 9 days because there's so much cleanup to do in order to make it be, commercially viable. And that's more expensive, far more expensive than just getting a really good take first time around.
Well, and speaking of the expense, just we have a lot of independent people that listen. If someone can't necessarily afford a full audio post-production, major budget to get the high end best of everything, do you have any advice about some particular equipment or software that can help them get partway there?
I would say that one of the challenges that I see that comes up with some regularity is that independent filmmakers on a tiny budget try and do everything themselves. And the best projects are the ones that are done collaboratively. So don't try and do it all yourself.
Yeah.
So you spent the money on a camera, you spent the money on some lights. When you're putting together the project, don't be afraid to put a few bucks into some post. And there's facilities like ours as well. We've got young sound designers and interns and whatnot that when things come through, occasionally we'll get a phone call and say, we can't afford your rate, but we've got this project. It's a 15-minute picture or whatever, or it's longer. We always say, don't hesitate to ask. My mom always told me it's okay to ask. Sometimes the answer is no, right?
Right.
But it's okay to ask. But I would venture to say, reach out, because that's how we learn. We don't learn when we're stuck in a vacuum. We learn when we collaborate. I mean, I'm still learning every day, and I learn from those that have gone before me and those that are coming up behind me. Some of the young artists that we have working with has blown my doors off every day. So, you spent the money on a camera because we think of it as a visual medium. But when you start thinking of it as a sensory medium, then, spend a few bucks on a good microphone. Make sure you wear your headphones, because microphones don't lie. Right. Your ears do. When you're standing out there, right? I can hear you and I talking, but you can't hear the river running right out here, right? So, because your ears block that out. So make sure you're wearing your headphones when you're on set, or your audio person is wearing their headphones when they're on set. Listen to it back. If you hear something that sounds odd or distortion on a microphone, on dialogue, nothing pulls you out of a story faster than bad, which is why you end up doing ADR, which ends up costing more. So a good recording on the front end. And then if it's recorded well on the front end and it's put together and it's systematically put together in a nice template so that it's very easy for someone else to understand it. When they receive 50 tracks of audio from you, there's not dialogue on 1 and dialogue on 9 and dialogue on 37. And it's all over the place. Keep the dialogue in the first 2 or 3 tracks, and then keep your music in the first couple tracks and the next couple tracks. Yeah. So that there's some organization to the way you lay it out. And then when you hand it over to a post house that you've negotiated with and say, I can only afford so much, can you help? They are much more amenable. Certainly, I'm speaking for us, we're much more amenable to helping if you all have done your homework ahead of time and really put forth a really good effort. Now you just want to take it home. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, no, excellent advice. Good stuff. And thank you so much for talking to us about all this. I know, myself included, we've all, and the listeners hopefully, have learned a lot more about audio, and we'll respect it a little more. Make sure to wear headphones, especially when capturing stuff. And yeah, I mean, there's even more I could ask, but we're already running long. I do that a lot. I find you all so interesting talking to people in these, because as you were saying, the collaborative element as well, not everybody can be more of an expert in every single thing that goes into bringing these projects together. So you have to lean on people that have devoted more time, energy, and effort to their specialty. So thank you for talking to us about yours.
Thanks for asking. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to Media Maker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candice Bloch, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim and Inez Perez, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakersSpotlight.com for more information.